Are you looking for an escape from manufactured truth wrapped in selfish agenda? Don't you just want to have a real and raw conversation, all masks and rules aside? That's what you're getting here at Titan Evolution Podcast. Get rid of all the nonsense information and discuss everything under the sun without filters. Listen to real stories of real people who will put your current perspectives to the test, guide you on living the life you truly want, and see everything free from judgment and pretenses. Time to get rid of those unhealthy environments and let your authentic self shine. Here are your hosts, Travis Johnson and Carol Carpenter.
Welcome to the first ever recording of the Titan Evolution Podcast. I'm here today with my co-host, Carol Carpenter, and our first guest, Lou Marinoff. Lou is an international best-selling author, and he is a philosophy professor at the City College of New York, based out of Harlem. Lou, how the hell are you?
I'm just fine so far, Travis. We'll see how it goes when the show develops, but it's a great honor to be with Carol and yourself, and especially since this is the first of your new series. Congratulations on launching it. Let's get it off the pad and into orbit.
Yeah, I couldn't think of a better first guest to get us all started. Lou has some absolutely crazy stories. Since this is our first show and this might be your first time listening, we're no kidding doing the no holds barred, explicit rated, authentic version of yourself. If the guests don't bring it, we're not going to air it. So we're happy to be here today. Carol, what questions do you have for Lou?
Well, Lou, I'd like to hear a little bit about your background because I hear you are a professor.
Yes, that's the truth. I've been a professor for about 30 years now, mostly at City College, 28 years at City College. It's been a wonderful career and a great institution, but I've led an interesting life. I was a musician for many years, a table hockey champion in Canada in my youth, which is not easy, 3 times in a row, Canadian Open champion. I eventually won the U.S. Open in my 60s, so I've had a second career as a table hockey champion. It's a great sport. We could talk about that. I write books. I've always written, thanks to my mom. My late mom, and she encouraged me from a very early age to write and to publicly speak. So I did a lot of that and developed maybe some skills. Who knows? I love the no holds bar approach, Travis. This is philosophy's a no holds bar subject on a good day too. So we have a basic fit here. Carol has said, I've been a musician, a classical guitarist, a teacher of music, a student of music, a lifelong devotee, not only of Western philosophy, but of Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, and Buddhism. So we could talk about that too. I gather you're from Taiwan originally. Is that right?
I am. Yes.
I've been to Taipei. I have friends there also. And
yeah, my family's still there. So yeah, I do get a chance to go back, but obviously COVID put a stop to that. So right now, I think there's just a 10-day hold, but there was a 3-week. Same thing. Government, mandated 21 days in a hotel room, can't leave. And I was like, I can't do that.
That's worse than Canada. I'm originally from Canada. I hadn't been back in about 2 years. And I did go back eventually, but they have a draconian policy also. I was vaxxed. I had to upload everything, register on 2 websites, get to the border, present them the hard copy with everything I had already uploaded. And then they said, okay, but here's a randomized COVID test. We're giving it to everybody. Randomized test. Everybody gets one, randomly. And, and I had to go.
I know.
You know the story with that, right? And then I had to see some nurse online who watched me very carefully.
Yes.
Do all that. You've done that? You've been there and done that?
Well, my boyfriend's from Canada. So yes, I've already done that. And you have to get the test 72 hours prior.
That's
if
right.
You miss it, and I missed it by an hour. They questioned me at the border and said, where were you? Were you getting gas? What were you doing? I said, well, I just got gas. I didn't see anybody. I didn't, I didn't expose myself to anybody. And after about an hour's wait, they finally let me through. It was incredible. So I had to make sure the next time I got the test, it was within the 72-hour period by the time I reached the border.
You're lucky they let you in. I know people who return back being an hour late. It's just a bureaucratic checkbox. Oh, you're overdue. Sorry, come back another time. I mean, they don't care. They're just, they're following orders. It's the loyal agent argument. It's a very bad argument. But basically, you're lucky they let you in. And Canadians have a harder time getting. I mean, I was only going for the day when I went in November. I went for the day, and I told them I'm going for the day, and they said, "Here's the randomized," and it takes 2 days to get the results. So I didn't want. I could have got myself disqualified right then and there had I asked, Travis, the question, I'm going to ask. I wanted to say to the immigration agent, I want to say, well, look, if I test positive, you're not going to know for 2 days. I'm already going to be back home in New York. You're going to make me come back in quarantine? What are you going to do? I'm going for 1 day. I'm coming back the same day. What is the point of taking a test that takes 2 days for, a result? But
there is no logic. There really was no logic in all of it.
That's right.
I don't know what people expected, right? This is the first time the world has collectively taken action against a quote unquote virus. There is no chance we were going to get it right. No chance everything was going to make sense, and no chance that we were going to all have the same policies and procedures. I just got a message from my good friend in New Zealand, said they finally opened up in New Zealand. So now he can start bringing in veterans and people for travel. But we've got a pretty interesting mix here because Carol is ABC, American born Chinese, but she owns her own motorcycle race team. And really she's Taiwanese. I'm, I guess, standard white guy from northern Minnesota. And Lou is a Canadian-born Jewish man who had to leave Canada. Did you run away from Canada? What was going on at the university scene up there?
Kicked out?
Well, no, they would have had I stayed any longer. But I took Plan A. I became a political refugee instead. You will have noticed, and the tie-in between COVID and the political question going back a few years, Travis, is this, that the world is in a completely novel place with COVID, and we still don't know where it comes from. We're not allowed to ask. We don't know a lot of things, and every government has had to circle its own wagons, and it's really wrecked the whole sort of emergent global village and the unity and all the potential good things that were happening got put on the back burner. And you're right, no one knows really still how to deal with it properly, and hopefully we'll have learned a lot from this, and we won't have a worse one. This was highly transmissible, but I mean, it's killed so many people that it wasn't even as fatal as it could have been if you think back 100 years ago to the so-called Spanish flu, which killed 50 or 60 million people. That was just, must have been a worse nightmare for them. But this is a bad thing. And we're just very fortunate to maybe be coming out of it now and resuming some form of normalcy. But as a philosopher, I'd have to say there isn't going to be a new normal. There's going to be a new abnormal. And the tie-in with New Zealand that you mentioned is this. We've noticed, some of us, that the formerly freest countries in the world became overnight the most repressive. If you look at the Anglophone social democracies, I won't name names aside from Canada, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, they were the most free among the free for long reasons, but they became actually the most repressive in their policies, which may have been well intended in terms of trying to protect their own populations, but they went over the top when it came to the mandates and the punishments and the, what they've been meting out to people. It's beyond the pale. We had a taste of it here too, as it went state by state. So why am I a political refugee from Canada? Because I was very fortunate to have had a good education up there. I'm middle class origins. We don't have private schools up there. We don't have the Ivy League. We have the big three: McGill, University of Toronto, University of British Columbia. That's our kind of Ivy League, but they're public. And the criterion of admission used to be merit. Everybody gets a K-12 education in Canada, and based on nothing but your ability to demonstrate that you're a good student, you could get admitted. And Canadian universities are by and large excellent anyway. So I was fortunate to win a Commonwealth scholarship to do a PhD in London. I did my PhD at University College, another historic place, and was really trained to be a kind of custodian of Western civilization. I mean, that's what my vision was, to preserve the best that's been thought and said and written, and to transmit it to the next generation, and maybe to add a few crumbs of knowledge to the mountain. I mean, that's the ambition. So I came back, but things got very politicized, as you know, because it happened earlier in the U.S., affirmative action and preferential hirings, reverse racism, reverse sexism, all that stuff. That happened here much, much more pervasively, but it happened in Canada too. And in Canada, because fortunately for Canadians, we don't have the legacy of slavery that exists in the U.S. You know, the Freedom Railroad ended at the border. A lot of African Americans and Caribbean Americans made it across into Canada and didn't encounter that, you know, that history of slavery up there. But basically, that meant that the feminists were first online for compensation. And they hijacked the Canadian Philosophical Association in the early 90s, just when I went on the job market, and essentially mandated a Marxist-style quota system so that they would guarantee professorships to women with PhDs, regardless of their publishing record, their teaching experience, or anything else, just because of the numbers game. You know, down here it's called underrepresentation. We could talk about that later. That's a tremendous myth that needs to be busted, okay? But anyway, I was definitely the wrong gender and the wrong color. So strike two, and strike three, I opened my mouth because, that's an occupational hazard for philosophers. And I told them this is plain wrong. I wasn't the only one, right? I was not the only one to tell them this. That an education system has to be based on merit, just like professional sports. Professional sports have to be based on how well can you play the game, right? I don't think the fans care, basically, what color the race car driver is or the basketball player. If you can do that well, if you can perform at a high level, the fans will pay to watch you, and everybody wins from that, right? And U.S. has time and again produced world-class sports and world-class Olympic teams precisely because it's not been successfully politicized. But everything else has been. Okay? So basically, I'm just very fortunate that I was able to compete in the U.S. market since I was locked out of the Canadian market. And eventually, it's rigorous. It's not easy to get a job as a professor. There were more than 300 applicants for the position at City College that year. I've seen ads when I got to be chair where we had as many as 500 or 600 applicants for one job. So you read everything. You look at everyone's application. You read the writing sample. It's a huge commitment of time. I made the long list of 20, and then I made the short list of 5. It goes on for months. And then 5 people get invited to campus for a job talk. And then the committee meets, and sheds blood in private, and they eventually offer it to somebody. I was fortunate to get the offer. But it was based on what I could contribute to the community of learning, and based on a solid track record. And if society works that way, then everybody wins. If it works on the basis of politicization and quota systems, everybody loses.
Oh, I agree with that. My son, when he was attending Gonzaga, was actually given a project, and he had to interview people that were entrepreneurs. And he interviewed me. And some of the things that I said were not okay for him to repeat in the classroom, because I basically said, being a woman entrepreneur is tough. And I hate to say this. And I go, I don't know how your university is going to feel about it, but it's tough for everybody. It's just not because I'm female. It's because it's tough for everybody. And he goes, I can't repeat that. And I go, why? It's true. And he goes, they're not going to want to hear it. And how sad is it these days that we can't actually say the truth, that it has to be PC?
Well, this is where the Soviet Union failed. It's where communist China failed and had to open up economically, not politically, but economically, because they also saw that collectivists, basically Marxist-Leninist policies, however you adapt them, they fail because they do not create opportunity. They create everybody becomes equal in the sense of equally disenfranchised and impoverished. I'm preaching to the choir. You know this perfectly well. But it's really what you said is so important. If we cannot speak the truth in the classroom, then we are doomed. You know that the Soviets starved millions of people to death because they tried to grow a second crop of winter wheat based on the Minister of Agriculture, Lysenko, was anti-Darwinist because Darwin was politically incorrect. Okay? No, it's true. And they adopted a theory that was politically correct, but that totally failed. And people starve. And if you're going to starve people physically, your country collapses. If you're going to starve people intellectually, your country collapses in slower motion. But it comes to the same bad end. Yeah, so let me tell you, may I?
Children.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What worries me is the children, what they're being taught. And this is our future generation. That worries me.
It should worry you plenty. And when it worries enough people, Carol, I have a remedy for this. For example, I have a few remedies. One remedy for sensitivity training, I call it insensitivity training. I've developed a workshop and I teach people how to be insensitive to each other so they can actually walk out into real life and not be triggered by every, unpleasant thing. I got censored last year, a couple of years ago. I've been censored all my life by academic publishers because they're all woke and they want to be made comfortable. And I updated a book that they invited me to publish, a scholarly book on human conflict, and they read the updated manuscript and they said, Lou, we can't publish this. It makes us, some of your views make us very uncomfortable. And I wrote back and said, this is the editors of a very good publishing house. And I said to them, look, it's not my job as a philosopher to make anybody comfortable. It's my job to make people think. And if you want to be more comfortable, you should check into a palliative care unit because that's their job, to make you comfortable.
You said in an interview that we had prior to this one, you said no one can offend anyone against their will. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll get to that in 1 second. Just let me finish, if I may, this anecdote for Carol and you, because it's right on point anyway. There was a lot of pushback against the Canadian hiring policy that favored women. And then they ran out of qualified women, so they started hiring unqualified women. Then they started importing them from the U.S. in violation of Canadian immigration laws, which said you have to have, qualified Canadians before you import, the whole thing. It's like that. So I wrote a novel, My Farewell Gift to Canada. And by the way, I'm very grateful in the end. I was a little upset at the time, but, it came to a much better end. Being in New York City was not a punishment for a philosopher. It was a great place to be. And I've become, I'm naturalized. I became a dual citizen. And if maybe Travis, you have no way of knowing, you don't need to know, but I'm going to tell you, it was shocking. One of the last steps in the, naturalization's a long process. One of the last steps is you have to sign a declaration of loyalty to protect and defend the American Constitution. Just as though you were in the military or the judiciary or any other thing, you have to demonstrate, you give your word to respect, protect, defend. And I do. I love it. It's a great Constitution. But then I had to sign another piece of paper right behind that one. And that piece of paper said, and I quote, I had to sign an oath saying, I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the Communist Party. 2003. Yes, you don't know this because you're American. God. And to become naturalized, this is a hangover from McCarthy, right? This is going back to the 1950s. And I wanted to say to them, again, I had every opportunity to be disqualified. I wanted to say it's too late. They're running the universities. What are you talking about? I mean, excuse me, talk about closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. I mean, Carol, you said you don't like the way your children are being educated. They're not. They're being indoctrinated. It's a political indoctrination. It's not an education. It's going to be a disaster. I used to run a public forum, a free public forum in Manhattan once a month in a big Barnes & Noble bookstore. I did it as a public service. We attracted 40 or 50 people every month, and it was open. Sometimes we picked a topic. Sometimes we just had a free-for-all. It's in New York City. What do people want to discuss? It's really important to bring philosophy into public spaces so people can air their views without fear. And you can't do that in the corporate world. You can't do that on campus. You could do it in a bookstore, at least back then. And one night we were talking about truth, because that's a perennially important topic, right? You mentioned truth. You can't speak truth anymore. Okay, what is truth? Let's get clearer. So we had that discussion. And somebody always says truth is relative, right? Truth is relative. So I asked them, so how much is 1 + 1? If all truths are relative, how much is 1 + 1? All right. And some people said 2. And listen, if it weren't two, then, the cell phones wouldn't work, Zoom wouldn't work, we couldn't get to the moon and back. If 1 + 1 were random, we wouldn't be able to get very far. So, but this one young lady, who was very well educated, piped up and said, no. She said, I'm not going to agree that, I'm not going to say that 1 + 1 is 2. She said, it's not, I don't want to say that. And I said, why in heaven's name wouldn't you want to agree that 1 + 1 is 2? This is a very well educated young lady. And she said, because I would not wish to offend anybody who, let's say, believes that 1 + 1 is 3 or something else. So by saying 1 + 1 is 2, I might offend someone who believes that 1 + 1 is 3. And I looked at her and I asked her, so where did you get your degree? And I won't name the institution because it's Brown. It's quite an expensive upscale place, And I just said to her one thing. They taught you this, and the professors probably believe this, but do you understand the irony that your parents paid a small fortune in tuition and that the bursar's office at Brown counted every penny? And if they were 1 penny short, they would have invoiced her for the 1 penny. They know what 1 + 1 is, and they know what $60,000 a year is times 4. They know all this. They're not shy to invoice your parents, so you can be taught nonsense. So basically, people are paying a small fortune to have their children turned into potted plants. Mm-hmm. It's a bad game plan.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I just wish people understood it is about contribution. And with these kids coming into the world, in professions that they have these ideas, it worries me because they don't know how to contribute.
Right. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't be philosophers. Don't get me wrong either. Back to that. We happen to have on faculty an excellent philosopher of physics. We wanted a philosopher of physics. It's a big subject. It's really interesting. And not for everybody, but, it's a really interesting subject. And we searched for the best philosopher of physics we could find because that's how we do things. We're a little bit, swimming against the current. And we hired the best philosopher of physics that we could find. And guess what? She happened, to turn out to be a woman, and that's great. That's fine too. That's a plus. But we hired her because she's really good as a philosopher of physics. That's the reason why she's on our faculty.
On merit.
And merit, back to merit. This country was based on merit. That's why we became the greatest country in the world in so many respects, because of meritocracy and nothing else. Opportunity. And here's the big thing. Equal opportunity is absolutely necessary. I was brought up as a classical liberal. I believe in equal opportunity very strongly. But equal opportunity will never give you equal outcomes. Mm-mm. If we all run a race, my friends, we can't all finish first. If we all finished first, it was rigged. It doesn't prove anything.
I watched them try to do that in, what was the movie? It was about Ford. It was Ford versus Ferrari. At the end of the Le Mans race, they had to slow the leader way down in order to let everyone else catch up. And the goal was to finish all three at the same time. Even coordinated, they couldn't make it happen. The Ford GT, it was their first foray into the real world, 24 hours of Le Mans, big race. Ferrari had been on top for years. They called this guy back who was far out front, who far deserved, did the engineering, did the testing. They wanted Ford GT to finish 1, 2, and 3, but really 1, 1, and 1 all at the same time. And because they pulled him back some weird track rule that I'm not familiar with, maybe Carol's familiar with it, but they tried to finish all at the same time. And the guy lost his world record and wasn't even considered finished first because he had to pull back.
Oh, no, there is no rule. There is no rule.
I don't know what the rule was. Someone out there knows what the rule is. They'll write us in and be like, Travis, I can't believe you didn't know the rule. But Lou, you mentioned about being PC and a few other things. What's this thing with PC and how can no one be offended against their will?
Back to that. Now, this is super important. I've been writing and teaching my students about this for a very long time. And I've made a couple of YouTube videos. If they got popular enough, they'd be yanked. For sure, they'd be pulled. They're still up there because they don't have enough visitors. But here's the bottom line, okay? In a civilized society, And it doesn't have to be U.S. Constitution. It could be British law. It could be Canadian law. It could be Taiwanese law. But these are civilized societies. And one of the things that makes them civilized is that they don't allow citizens to go around harming each other. Okay, there's a remedy. You know, on a good day, people don't go out to harm each other. And if somebody does harm to somebody, then that person who has perpetrated the harm is accountable to the justice system for having done it. And there's going to be some kind of a remedy offered to society. You know, there's going to be a criminal prosecution or a civil prosecution or both, as is common in this country to harm doers. And that person will be brought to justice and made in some sense or other to, you know, to make some kind of payment back to society or back to the person who was harmed. We just don't tolerate it. And for the most part, if you're harmed, you are an unwilling or an unwitting victim of a harm. You know, you didn't consent to be harmed, and moreover, under most civilized laws, you cannot consent to be harmed. They used to have a consent to be harmed. They called it dueling. You know, if a bunch of army officers were sitting around the table and someone said, you know, you offended me, or I demand satisfaction, and let's go out and you know, we're going to try and kill each other. They have rules for that too, Marquis de Queensberry or whatever, the dueling pistols or swords and all this. But, you know, that got abolished eventually because they realized this is not a good idea, because it's very easy to, you know who were the first to abolish dueling? It's very funny, the French. And I speak French fluently. I'm quite at home in French cultures, but I want to tell you they can be very thin-skinned, and so they were losing. They were the first to abolish dueling in the military because they were losing more officers in duels than in combat.
Oh wow!
Left to their own devices, they were knocking each other off like there was no tomorrow. Every time someone looked the wrong way at someone, it was a duel. And they lost at least one mathematical genius that way, Galois, who founded group theory. It's a huge branch of mathematics. And he wrote in his diary he had to fight a duel the next morning, and he thought he was going to lose. He had a bad feeling about this one. And so he tried to write some notes that mathematicians had been deciphering for decades, you know, to work out what he didn't have time because he was killed in the duel. So that was not a good idea. And that was the last time you could really, in an institutional sense, consent to be harmed, right? Now, when you drive a race, if someone's driving Formula One, Carol, they're consenting to die too.
We sign waivers like crazy.
You got to sign, I'm sure, more than on a closing of a house. I mean, these days the lawyers are up to, you know, you're knee deep. So you got to sign all this. And if you step into a boxing ring, if you play any professional sport where potentially if things go wrong, you could be seriously injured or even killed, you're going to sign off. So that's
Serving in the military, same thing.
Military,
Oh,
big
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Big time, big time. So these are the exceptions to the rule. But if, let us say, two people in a bar decide to go out and duke it out in the parking lot, okay? And one of them, you know, gets hurt and wants to sue the other one, and the guy says, hey, he consented to fight me. It's not a defense.
Interesting.
You cannot harm somebody, and the person who was harmed, you know, it's not a defense for you, even if they say I consented, you know, to this guy, you know, with this guy to fight him. You can't
makes
do
me
that.
wonder about like extracurricular bedroom activities, because some things are getting a little bit dicey. Like weapons, whips, chains, handcuffs, tying people up, suffocation, fantasy, strangling, like all sorts of just like bizarre stuff. And I'm saying bizarre because it's just not everyday conversation. Not that it's weird, but like I suppose I don't know if there's a waiver that covers that kind of
well,
behavior
Travis, you
as well.
sound like an expert. You probably ought to know. I mean, but I've heard about all this BSDM stuff. I go with John Stuart Mill, who wrote the most famous book on harm. It's called On Liberty. It's an essay on liberty, an eloquent defense of liberty. And he said that's the only place we can draw the line. John Stuart Mill, great English philosopher who also served in Parliament. He walked the walk. He talked the talk. His essay on liberty is one of the greatest defenses of individual liberty in the English language. I urge you to read it. And in it, he enunciates what he calls the harm principle. And he says specifically, therefore, that the only mandate that a government has to restrain somebody, to either put the cuffs on or to lock you up or to, the only reason with justification a state could restrain somebody is if that person is harming other people or threatening to harm other people or credibly planning to harm other people. Then the state has indeed the duty to restrain that person. But otherwise, if you're not harming somebody, Travis, they would say, Mill would say, if you're having fun in the bedroom, you're both consenting adults or however many you are, and you want to, and you want to get leather goods or you want whatever it is you're doing.
No judgment.
No judgment. No
My
judgment.
parties are way
I'm
more
saying
than
if
two
you're
people, I'm just
consenting
saying.
adults, and you want to roughhouse in the bedroom, then, that within reason, then there would be also a line. If that line is crossed and people are really getting harmed, they're getting harmed now by gender therapies, they're getting harmed by being brainwashed to have gender dysphoria and that's real irreversible harm. And the state is actually doing it, and the state should be the one who's stopping it from being done. So, okay, that's harm. And there are also inadvertent or impersonal harms. I mean, God forbid you could be struck by lightning. That, there's all, you could have an accident, you lose control of your car in an icy road, and, you have snow and ice up there in the winter, people, flip their vehicles or whatever. That's a harm, and it's not that someone did it to you. It could be an accident. So there are lots of ways of being harmed. And in any case, you're a victim and you probably didn't consent to it. You probably didn't wish it on yourself. Or, that's the thing about harm. Now, offense is in a totally different category. Because harm is given, offense is taken. That's the formula. If I say something you don't like and you decide to take offense, that's your choice, not mine.
Wait, hold on. You mean when you're saying these nasty things, because obviously you're a nasty person, there's
Right.
not little molecules that float on your sound waves and then they hit the person and that thing just ripples offense through my body? That's not how it works.
Well, let's go into a lab and detect it. This is you're a brilliant empiricist, Travis. Let's get some grant and we'll go to measure it. Let's build an offensometer so we could actually test this out. So when people say they're offended on a scale of 1 to 10, we can verify this in the laboratory. We'll take the offending stimulus and we'll measure its intensity and its effect. Maybe there are nanoparticles, going into the body, as you suggest. But on a common sense reading, no. It's the case that people are behaviorally conditioned to take offense because they're getting empowered by it. They're getting rewarded for it, and they get to step on somebody for it, whereas normally they'd have no right to harm. They actually harm people by claiming they're offended. And so what it amounts to is that an offense can be offered. We were taught, when I was a little kid, my parents incessantly repeated, sticks and stones can break your bones, but names can never hurt you.
Unless you choose to let them hurt you.
Unless the system rewards you for choosing to let them hurt you.
Ooh.
That's behavioral reinforcement.
The
Then
system rewards us?
There we
So
go.
the system says to me, and I'm learning this from a small age, so I'm watching other people who claim, who say, oh, so-and-so offended me, and then that person gets tarred and feathered and ridden out of town on a rail, or they get morally censored, or they get canceled because they said something that the mob doesn't like. So we got the mob running our society instead of the law. So that's wonderful, right? That's a great thing. So what happens is that if you think about it carefully, and here's the point, it used to be the case that comedians could get away with this because they could say things that nobody else could say. They could say stuff on Seinfeld, and if you repeated the joke in the office, you could get fired. And the employer was damned if they didn't, because if they fired you, you could sue them. And if they didn't fire you, somebody else could sue them for letting you tell the joke.
This is just
Insane.
absolutely bizarre where we are as a I watched a little Dave Chappelle clip that he was up as a comedian, and this is a little bit derailed from what we're talking about, but he was in Detroit, and I guess he was getting booed and no one is enjoying the show, and they demanded their money back. And he's like, look, I don't know what you think this is, but I'm just like Evel Knievel. I get paid for the attempt to be funny.
Right.
And if you don't like it, I am never giving your money back. And it goes on into, so he's got a much better delivery than I do. But it's so crazy that people are attaching themselves to all these things in order to wake up and get agitated by being offended or joining in the victimhood in order to perpetuate I'm not even sure what the goal is anymore.
Oh, the goal is to make everybody angry 24/7, to make everybody hostile to everybody else, and to constantly seek scapegoats, people they can blame for all the world's problems. At the moment, it's people who look like you, Travis, and and me without a suntan.
I'm the bad guy here.
Yeah, it's all
white,
your
but
fault.
you're not white enough.
No, I'm not. Well, it depends who you ask. You see, this is back to what I said to the Canadian feminists. They didn't, for some reason, like it. I think that it offended them. But I asked them when they said, and they produced this manifesto. We have the same in the States now, but they produced a manifesto saying there were too many white male professors in Canadian universities. I'll slow down. Too many white male professors in Canadian universities.
How dare you?
They published this.
That's
and they
insane.
Well, no, it's policy now if you're a Marxist. So what they said was too many white male professors. So I thought, okay, I'm off the hook. I'm Jewish, right? Like I said to them, excuse me, take a closer look at me. When I get into the sun, I tan very dark brown, okay? I don't turn beet red like a lobster. I said, I get very dark. I'm Mediterranean descent, okay? And I said, so really, and my students at City College crack up. I said, I'm not really white, I'm off-white. They laugh. They laugh. You're laughing. They laugh. No, they didn't like it. I said, where were you? Then I got a little serious with them. I said, where were you when Hitler passed the Nuremberg laws, kicking all the Jewish professors out of German universities, which they Nazified? They said there were too many non-Aryan professors in the universities, right? Meaning Jews. So they got rid of some of their best professors. And because they were not white enough. So I said, make up your mind. If you guys could have saved us a lot of trouble, if only you had been around to explain to the Nazis that Jews are actually white. Wow. Maybe we would have saved 6 million lives. Now that was not said in jest, but it was a kind of a dagger that got them in the heart. And they definitely then said, we're really glad you're leaving Canada. It made them doubly glad. So I gave them a farewell
that
present.
Settles it. Get out.
Yeah, I was out of there. I gave him a farewell present. I'll send it to you guys. You're going to love it. I wrote a novel. That was my farewell gift to Canada when I left. I wrote. I didn't.
Which one?
It's called. It was my first novel. It's called Fair New World. I self-published it, and in May of 1994, I came to City College in September of 94. I started there in September of that year. But in May of 94, it was my last summer in Canada, and I self-published this novel, and I sold 2,000 copies out of a post office box in Vancouver. I'd sent it to all the literary agents in Toronto, 4 of them. There's all 4 of them, right? And one of them wrote back and said, we can't represent this book. If we represent this book, then we're out of a job, because the publishers will be so offended by it that they'll never buy a book from us again. And I got the same thing in New York too. So I've been selling this underground, and it's been compared to works by Huxley and Orwell and Swift and Vonnegut, and no one wants to touch it because it's illogical. What I did was I showed what would happen if feminists that were that radical, I'm talking about mainstream feminism that just wants equal opportunity for women. I'm totally in favor of that, right? I'm talking about the radicals.
Yeah.
So this book is a future projection of what the world would look like if these completely radical feminists were actually running it. Well, 30 years later, this is what you have, Travis. You called it crazy. It is crazy, okay? Because they're in charge. Anyway, that was the novel. It was also predicting the future. And I'll send you guys a copy. You'll get a good laugh out of it. And so seriously.
No, I subscribe to that belief. That's why I'm actually quite angry at our system, because I want our children to be free thinkers, and I was blessed with the opportunity to go to a private school, and it was also a non-denominational Christian school. So I learned creationism and Darwinism. I was given the choice to pick which one I believed. That is not something that I believe our educational systems allowing our kids these days. They're feeding and literally spoon feeding our kids these principles and these beliefs. And I hear them being regurgitated by my kids, and I don't even know what to say to them except for, you've been lied to.
Yes, well, you're very fortunate. And when my science students, who all know more or less about Darwinism, are looking for counterexamples, that we explain something in philosophy that's called, it's a technical term, the underdetermination of theory by data. What it means is that if you look at a given phenomenon out there, you look at a data set, or you look at an event or whatever, there are always in principle many, many possible explanations that would explain why this happened, okay? And the real art of finding the truth, back to truth, the real art is to be able to pick which explanation is actually the true one. Many may be close, but no cigar. Many may be totally false. So I tell my students, if you're a creationist, you have a perfectly good explanation as to why there are dinosaur bones in the earth, because God put them there to test your faith. This is what they taught you in, on the creationist view. And if you want to believe that, then it's a perfectly good explanation. It doesn't prove anything, but it's a perfectly good explanation. But it opens your mind. Universities should be places where you learn about all kinds of views, and a place which broadens horizons and opens minds. Instead, they're teaching people one monolithic doctrine. They call it diversity. Yeah, diversity of everything but opinion, right? It's Orwell, because every word's mean the opposite. Diversity means there's only one thing allowed to be said and taught, and that's called diversity. And inclusiveness means, we only include the people who, are triggered like us. Anybody who's not triggered, who's not walking around, with their mind bent out of shape, they're going to be excluded, because they
Travis.
We're back.
Travis, you excluded yourself. We weren't inclusive enough.
When I hear diversity right now as it stands in America, I hear, I don't know if this is true or not, I hear everyone but me
frozen.
Being a white middle-class Christian man.
It's a signal.
Hang on. I'm going to see if he tried to.
We're all here. I can see you all. You guys are moving.
Are we good?
Oh, wait.
Yeah, we're here and we're back.
All right. We can hear you well.
Yeah. Yeah, I put up the big X because diversity, as I hear it, doesn't include me. It doesn't include white middle-class Christian males. And I've been included in a lot of different types of conferences and a lot of different places, and I've been told we have enough white guy presenters.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it doesn't bother me because my feelings don't get hurt about stuff like that. But the fact that they would exclude someone that can contribute to the conversation at whatever level is what bothers me. I was at a networking meeting. Only guy there was 17 ladies, which is a great ratio for me. I love that ratio. I got kind of stepped on because someone's like, well, I am a single mom, so I can explain this. That's great that you're a single mom, and I love your experience that you have. But I was the kid of a single mom. I have another valid perspective. Please don't step on me just because you don't think that my experience can be included or not. I'm not trying to say that I know more than you because I'm not a single mom. I'm not saying that at all. But let's make sure that we are legitimately including the diverse opinions and experiences and the stories of people that have other places to step in at, because we all have different places and opinions. I love hearing about all these opinions because I want to figure out what is it that happened to you that I don't know about. What had happened in your experience that I'm missing? Is there something I'm missing? Is there something in my experience that you're missing? What is it? How can we be curious and learn and move and grow together? What does that look like?
Right. Well, you're very open-minded, which is a credit to you. And basically, so we've understood that this whole thing is Orwellian in the sense that the slogans actually mean their opposites. So diversity means monolithicity, and inclusiveness means we exclude the people who don't look like us, or we don't like the way they think
the same.
They don't think the same.
Yeah.
So we can't include them because that will threaten diversity.
I don't want to be around people that think the same.
Well, you don't, and we mentioned this, and the viewers should know it, that the New England Idealists, this great American philosophical movement of the mid-19th century, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, I mean, they were white males. They were living in Concord, Massachusetts, in a beautiful community, and the leader of that community was the father of Louisa May Alcott, and he ran this little school of philosophy. She was part of it. Nathaniel Hawthorne was part of it. And if you ever go to Concord, it's an hour out of Boston. They're all in the cemetery. You can spend a day there. They'll give you a tour of their homes and the bookstores there. It's a beautiful place. And they describe themselves as follows. They said, we're a community of like-minded people, no two of whom think alike.
I like it. I like it.
You are, we are. This is the whole point. We don't have to think alike. It's better if we don't think alike, because then we get true diversity and true inclusiveness, and we broaden, back to broadening the horizons. So offense, okay, we gotta settle. We talked about harm. We gotta talk 5 minutes about offense, and then I want to give you a potential explanation, Travis and Carol, also about why it is that it's been so easy to hoodwink so many people based on appearance. Why is appearance so important? Why is it that whiteness or blackness or Asianness or femaleness or maleness, or, why has this become so paramount in the political pecking order? Okay, we want to talk about this, but just to settle this thing about offense, if you decide that you don't like something that somebody says, I mean, you're entitled to do that. And if you decide that somebody said something that you find to be offensive, then certainly you're entitled to feel offended if you want to. But it's not a harm. It's something that's being offered to you. You can take it or leave it if you know how. If you have what I call the moral agency, I mean, if you have enough self-esteem, psychologists would call it self-esteem. I don't call it that. I say you're a moral human being. You have dignity and nobility by virtue of being born human. That's the ultimate privilege, my friends. We talk about privilege. Excuse me, the real privilege is you were born human, and it was a long shot, no pun intended. I mean, the whole idea of, how many competitors there were to fertilize that ovum? There were trillions and
400 trillion to one.
There you go. So what are the odds that you were you? That's the ultimate, you won the biggest gamble in the universe, and the whole normal response to that would be gratitude. Wow, am I ever lucky to be alive? And if circumstances militate against you, in history you're born in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can get pretty bad. Okay, it can get very bad. But under no circumstances should you take offense. What you should do is get out of harm's way the best way you can. But none of it is offense. That's just you deciding to be upset by something. The ancient Stoics had it right. The Roman Stoics were phenomenal. One of the bumper stickers from Roman Stoicism was Epictetus. He was a freed slave. Okay, and he ended up teaching indirectly the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the great philosopher, emperor of Rome, and he said, Marcus Aurelius said, Epictetus is the guy I learned the most from by reading his works. And I mean, Aurelius was an emperor and Epictetus was a freed slave, but Epictetus said, hey, it's possible to be serene even in a palace. I mean, it's because when you have all kinds of power and wealth and responsibility, life doesn't get easier. Right? You know this. Life does not get easier. Epictetus said people are not upset by circumstances, but by the views they take of them. So stuff happens. What view are you, Travis, going to take of what just happened? What view, Carol, are you going to take of what just happened? You have this option of taking any number of views. If you want to take the view that you're offended by it, you'll upset yourself, and that no good will come of it. There are lots of other possible views. So the people who are doing this, Travis, are people who need an enemy in the morning. They got to get up and blame somebody for their unhappiness. What their unhappiness is caused by is their bad ideology. It's toxic, but they don't know this because they've been brainwashed to believe it's the one true ideology. But they're the ones who are making themselves unhappy and nobody else. But as long as they're empowered to point the finger, then they're going to just increase the unhappiness all around and do real harms to people on the fabricated excuse that you said something I don't like, or you look offensive. You don't even have to open your mouth anymore. You can just show up at a conference and they're all going to, wait a second, what's this white male doing on the stage? We have, that's offensive. That's offensive.
People talk about wanting to be like the Secretary of Defense. I want to be the Secretary of Offense because I'm offensive. Is that how that works?
Right. I gave certificates to people who endorsed my novel. There was a woman, I'll tell you a true story about a great Canadian heroine of mine. Her name is Karen Selleck, and she was an attorney. She's retired now, but I'm still in touch with her. And Karen was an attorney in the province of Ontario. And they started fast-tracking women to the bench because they had a quote-unquote underrepresentation of women on the bench. The normal time for a judge would be 10 years. Average time would be 10 years of legal minimum, but 10 years, would be okay if you were a really good lawyer. Then you could get promoted. In Canada, they're not elected; they're promoted. So they were promoting women after 5 years because they wanted to make up for the shortage. You don't have equal numbers of women on the bench. So they offered her a judgeship, and she declined it. And she said on national television, I saw the broadcast. It was a nightly newscast that went out, W5, like a big national show. And she got on the air, this woman. What a brave woman. She got up and said, "And would you like to know why I declined the judgeship?" And they said yes, because they had, rehearsed that the question would come. And she said, okay. She said, had I been offered the judgeship on the basis of my legal expertise or my passion for justice or my track record as an attorney, had I been offered that, in other words, on the basis of merit, right, the M word again, had I been offered that, I would have accepted the judgeship. But she said, I was offered the judgeship for only one reason, because I have a vagina. And she said it was insulting and demeaning and denigrating to me personally to be offered a judgeship on that basis. So she said this on national television. What a tremendous
kudos to her.
Good for her. So anyway, this novel that I wrote, she called it the most politically incorrect work of art I have ever seen. And she's certainly qualified. She was well qualified to say that. So offense is taken, not given. If you decide to take offense, that's your decision. Nobody can offend you against your will. People can harm you against your will, unfortunately. Nobody can offend you against your will. So you're an accomplice in being offended. You're not an accomplice in being harmed. You're an accomplice in being offended. That's the really hard and fast distinction. That you decide to take offense, you could just as well decide not to take offense. If you don't like a book, don't read it. You don't like a podcast, don't listen. You don't like a TV program, change the channel. But if the system rewards you now and gives you power over people, and I can point the finger and say, you offended me and therefore I can get you fired, that's very corrupting. And so people will walk around. People will walk around looking to be offended. That's what triggered means. They're walking around with their noses permanently out of joint because they get some power over somebody for being offended. That's all they have to do is say, you offended me. You're accused and therefore guilty. There's no due process in this. And then you have to pay the price for somebody else's state of mind. So I said to them, look, and I teach this to my students, it's probably a crime against some university administrations. City College is a public university, so the First Amendment does apply on campus so far, but it doesn't apply in the private sector. And so I teach my students that if you're offended by something, it was your choice to take offense. And if you choose not to be offended, you'll be much happier, and the world will be a much better place. But the way things stand now, I will become, and you, Travis, and you, Carol, are responsible for everybody else's state of mind. Because if you say something they don't like, it's your fault, right? You offended me, your fault. Carol, you offended somebody, your fault. So we are now responsible for everybody else's state of mind, but no one's responsible for their own state of mind. So people who walk around ready to take offense all the time are no longer responsible for their states of mind. Excuse me, Travis, who's responsible for your state of mind? I think it's you.
I would like to take responsibility, but I had a lot of help.
Yes. But Carol, are you, same question. Are you responsible for your state of mind at the end of the day? Like, where does the buck stop?
Absolutely.
Of course. Of course, it's your mind. If you're not responsible for your state of mind, then someone else is controlling your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I are going through The Body Keeps the Score. I can't remember the name of the author right now, but it gets to a point in there that talks about emotional cycles. And it mentioned that the vast majority of things that impact us emotionally last about 90 seconds. If you can hold out for 90 seconds, it's essentially over, no matter what it is, no matter if it's joy, happiness, sadness, depression, whatever the thing is, lasts about 90 seconds. And if you can weather the storm, it'll pass. It's like, but so many people love the feeling of whatever they're feeling, generally a negative feeling. They'll take it and they'll work it through their mind and work it again, and they'll go over it and over and over it, essentially, purposely re-damaging themselves because of the way that we're taught to view cycles. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're like, talk about offense, Lou, I've been offended this whole episode. Give it 90 seconds. Don't repeat it. Give it 90 seconds and see how you feel. Take some ownership of this stuff. If you go through and you look at my bio and look at my background, I'm not going to go into it on the episode here. You would think that most people would just write me off based on my background. We don't expect a lot out of you, Travis. In fact, here's welfare. Just do whatever. Just don't make an impact. Don't cause wave. Nobody's expecting anything of you. And here's the deal. A lot of stuff that happens to us is not our fault. It's not. But I am responsible to track down to get and attain and get healing for the things that happened in my world. And then it's my responsibility to move forward with my life, no matter what happened. Right? It's not about fault. And even if you do say and do figure out whose fault it is, discovering that fault is not somehow going to fix anything. You have to take the responsibility for your own healing and moving forward with your life. That's just how it works for every single person. And that's just the big difference. Instead of pointing the finger out, it's saying, you know what? I am where I am and I need to move forward with it. How do I do that regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the economy, regardless of the political opinions, regardless of your income, regardless of the terrible people in your life? If you don't like it, change it. And it starts with each individual. Brilliant. What do you think about all this, Carol?
I think that's totally brilliant. Carol, go ahead.
No, I was just listening to Travis. I think it's true. We do have a choice. And at the end of the day, it's up to us. And he did say it was about circumstances. We aren't in control of certain circumstances. The families we're raised in, how we're raised, our gender, right? We're not responsible for those things. But we can also, if we disagree with somebody, instead of just flat out disagreeing, hear what the other person has to say. I want to understand why you disagree with me. And maybe if you'll listen to me, I can explain to you, why I have this viewpoint. And we can meet somewhere in between. It doesn't mean we can't be friends. It doesn't mean that we can't both have opposing views, right? It doesn't mean that because of these things, we can't get along. And this is where we are right now, is people aren't getting along because they have opposing views.
Hold on. Are you saying you don't have to have agreement-based relationships?
No, we don't, dear.
Are you sure? So what does this look like? You haven't spoken a lot during this thing, Carol. I want to make sure you get your chance to weigh in this. You are a female motorsports owner in a male-dominated industry. I don't know if you know any other gals that own motorsports team. Like how does this stuff apply to your professional world?
Well, I think, first of all, I had a lot of females that wanted to be part of my track organization. And they came up to me and said, you should hire me. And I said, oh, really? Why should I hire you? Because I'm a female. And I said, oh, well, I don't hire people because they're female and somehow that will benefit me to have more females, right? I actually pick people that are good individuals, ethically sound and moral, right? And you don't fit the bill. And just because you have a vagina and a boobs doesn't automatically, get you in. You don't get the red carpet to come in. You actually have to be a good individual that really is passionate about the sport and wants to teach people, because that's what's important to me.
How do they take this?
Not very good.
Why do you think that is?
Because it actually holds a mirror in front of them. And they have to reflect on the person they actually are inside. They think they can get through just because they're female. And I don't pick people because they're male or female. I pick them because they have a true passion for the sport. It's to better the sport, not better whatever you want or how you want to benefit from it.
Very interesting. I've been accused of a lot of things in my life. Being an asshole is one of the things I've been accused of. And it's true. I know I'm definitely the villain in some people's stories, but most of the time when people call me names like that, it's because I'm holding them accountable for their nonsense and they're just not ready for it. I'm getting big. If you're just listening to this and not watching this, everyone's giving me the big north and south head nod. What do you think about that, Lou, about holding people accountable for their nonsense?
Well, there's nobody's accountable anymore from the top down. That's one of the problems in our society. And back to what Carol was saying and what you were saying, it used to be, I remember a time in my early life when I had, there were a lot of family members around, and you could have political differences and it didn't destroy families. You could have people, husbands and wives could vote differently and it didn't destroy families at all. It wasn't that important. We went out and expressed our democratic right to vote as we saw fit. And if a husband and wife had different political leanings and they voted differently, that didn't destroy the marriage at all. In fact, it could even make the family stronger in some way by being, shall we say, diverse and inclusive. Okay, and also you could you could have that kind of, you could have religious differences, you could have interfaith marriages that work exactly for the same reason, or for that matter, interracial marriages that work for the same reason. And now we're getting identity politics, and that whole thing is totally now wiped out by identity politics. So what you were saying, Travis, is really, if you want my take on it, look, there's only two ways to irritate people, either by telling lies about them or by telling truths about them. Okay, and essentially, if you're telling, people would sometimes get more irritated by the truths. So when you hold up that mirror, Carol, as you said, that's a very apt metaphor. You hold up a mirror to people. If they don't like what they're looking at, then they ought to take a closer look at themselves in their own mirror and maybe work to make some changes. So that's what people don't really want anymore, is to have a mirror held up to them to see what they really look like. They won't tolerate it. And this is the toxic after effect of identity politics, and we really need to talk about that a bit more if you want to, because it's what is driving all of this other stuff that we've already identified as being not wholesome for the culture.
Well, I did want to talk a little bit first, Lou, about your life in the classroom. You're self-identified as a conservative, and many college universities are pretty liberal, but you've actually won Teacher of the Year award. How does that happen to a conservative professor in the classroom?
Well, I would like to say that it's not me, but once again, it's the students and the colleagues. You know, the students evaluate the professors. At the end of the day, you teach a course. The students are the ones who evaluate you and write comments. And when teachers want to, if professors apply for, or nominate, we don't apply, you have to get nominated for an outstanding teaching award. They only give out one per year. There's a lot of faculty members and a lot of deserving ones. So I won the award in 2019 after, quite a few years of service, like 25 years of service or whatever it was. But my students appreciate an open-minded, open-ended classroom where they're not afraid to say things in my class that they'd be afraid to say in other classes. I make it clear that on day one to them that philosophy is a subject in which we ask questions, we conduct inquiries, we go where the truth leads us. So there is no such thing, I tell them, as a foolish question in philosophy. Every question is important. And what I also tell them is that, of course, if they ask enough questions, they're bound to get some foolish answers. But there's no foolish question. And that, it's wow, so I could ask. And what they don't really realize is that they're teaching me half the time, because the questions they come up with sometimes are wonderful questions that no other student came up with. And the professor, if the professor's awake, has to think and give a really well-considered reply to the student, and a deserved reply. Sometimes it takes me a day or two. I say, well, wait a second, I'm going to look this up. Let me think about this. This is a great question. And I come back to them. And so they're encouraged to inquire. And that's what education is supposed to be, inquiry. Right? Informed inquiry, not indoctrination. So that's one thing. And if they gave me the award, it's not because they agree with my politics. There are very, very few, and fewer than ever, people who are self-described as conservative. Now it's progressive to the point of being extreme progressivism. I'm a liberal from the 50s and 60s, but nowadays the left has moved so far left that a classical liberal looks like a conservative, right? Actually, I don't identify with either extreme, Travis, and I don't think either of you do too. I think we're talking about, why can't we take what's best from the left and what's best from the right and make a better world, taking what's best and rejecting what's worst? Because there is bigotry on the right. I'm not saying there's institutional racism. That's a boogeyman. Okay? That's ridiculous. But there are definitely a few bigots in the woodwork. Okay? If you go far enough right, you'll find them. And on the left, you've got, the other extremists who won't say whether you're a man or a woman because they're not a biologist. Excuse me. They're not. Okay, so that's pretty loony left. God help us all. But what we want to do is, I think, reject the bigotry from the far right and reject the anti-delusional anti-realism from the far left, and let's bring liberals and conservatives together on the same platform, and let's discuss and find common values, and that's the way to go forward. And that's what it means to represent the whole people and not to divide. Unfortunately, there's so much money and power in the race industry, in the gender industry, in the let's divide and conquer industry, let's polarize the country even more industry. It's counterproductive. And anyone who wants to have
you got to wonder if it's like a diversion for something, because all this negativity, all this, talk about what gender are you? I mean, all of it is, what are we diverting the attention from? It has
Is that
to
a
be
question?
something.
Is that a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're diverting attention from the most important things. And what I teach my students in ethics, and I do this in intro too, in a, like we do it light, and then in ethics we do it, in a more developed way. But so you guys, fasten your seatbelts, because here comes more political incorrectness. And I ask them, so if I tell you that, here's somebody named Jones, okay? So if I tell you Jones is tall, way taller than average or way shorter than average, what does that tell you about Jones's moral character? The fact that Jones is tall or short. What is that? And they say nothing, right? Nothing, zero. Okay. I say, so what if I tell you that Jones has like blue eyes or green eyes or red eyes or, or pink eyes or, what does that tell you about Jones's moral character? What does the eye color tell you about his moral character? Nothing, nada, zero, rien, right? Okay. So then I play this game for a while and you see where it's going. So then I say, okay, so now Jones is Jones is a little overweight or Jones is a little underweight. What is that? Nothing. So none of these factors tells you anything about the person's moral character, and that's what's really important. And the same with IQ. What if Jones is a genius? Okay, what if Jones is not, not too quick, okay, on the draw, but gets it, but a little slower than average? Okay, what is that? It tells you nothing. What's really important in a family, in a society, in a country is people of good character. That's what you want. Of course, you want all this diversity of expertise and interests and abilities. That's what makes the whole thing a beautiful mosaic. But what you really want at the core, what's really important, is a pure mind and a good heart. That is what makes people as great as they could be, no matter what they look like. Okay? No matter what they come from genetically. That's not important. So those are the values that need to be instilled in children and are not being instilled, because they're being taught to focus on all the wrong things. And so my students learn that I treat them all the same, in terms of the abilities of their minds. It doesn't matter to me what country they've come from or what culture or what religious background or none or any of that stuff or what they look like cosmetically. That's only skin deep. What's really important is the quality of their understanding, and that is independent of all the rest of the stuff that everyone is politicizing to the point of destroying the country.
Right.
I know that when I turn off the news and I go hang out with real people, it doesn't matter where I hang out with real people. I've been in all 50 states, been to Canada, Mexico, Honduras, Belize, Spain, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Turkey. Where else have I been? Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Turns out, I don't know if you guys know this, hold on to your butts, there's people everywhere. There's families, people that are providing for their families in whatever way they know how. They want to be reasonably safe and secure. They want their kids to have it better than they are, to be educated. They want to have a decent paying job and largely be left alone. I remember going over to the Middle East for the first time, not knowing what I was going to find based on what the news told me to be scared of. And I get over there, I'm at a park and I see a family come in and the kids ran around and were playing and they were having fun together. I went into a mall and, inevitably there's a mom pulling a screaming kid because they had to, I don't know, not get the cookie or whatever the thing is. Turns out people are just people, and the vast majority of discord is only seen on nationwide news networks. All of the bad news that we see in the paper that comes overseas, when you're over there and you're talking to people about America, they only get the most terrible news coming out of America. It's the same both directions. If you go on Google Earth right now, you can go into Iran and you can look around and you can see people in plain clothes at a carnival eating cotton candy. If everything is so terrible in this country, in America, a lot of people on the left, and I always say that. I know people on the right say it too, but I talk to the people on the left, and they're like, "It's so terrible here, this, that, and the other." It's like, well, how do you feel about immigration? Oh, we should have open borders. I'm like, so you want people to come over to America in droves so they can join in this terrible country that we've created? That doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense. And this country was built on immigration. All of us are from different places. You were born here. Carol and I came here. We have millions of people historically every year trying to get into this country on all kinds of bases because it is the freest country in the world. Still, in spite of all the damage that's been done, it's still a place where most people want to come to and not leave once they get here, because there is still ample opportunity and a sense of, from the Constitution, that you have certain rights irregardless of what you look like or where you come from. You said it, Travis. By the way, how'd you get to all 50 states? That's an incredible accomplishment. I mean, no, I'm serious. That's amazing. That's really quite amazing.
I hit all 50 states about 7 years ago, about 33. I hit them all. A lot of cross-country trips, a lot of driving, and then the military through some of the travel things that we went to. I ended up getting to my last 5 states, which were Vermont, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and Alaska. So thank you so much to the U.S. Navy for getting me all of those wonderful places.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. We Canadians didn't take too long getting to Vermont, let me tell you. It's right across the border from Quebec, the great state. We love New England. But here's the thing. That I like you, I have friends all over the world. I mean, I've lived in 4 different countries. I, grew up in Canada, lived in the UK, lived in Israel, I know the Middle East, and I've lived, of course, in the U.S. for 28 years, but I've traveled the world. I have friends in China. I have friends in, all over. We teach in my nonprofit. We teach philosophers from all over the world. We just ran a program early in June. We had philosophers from India, from Turkey, from Hong Kong, from Italy, UK, Canada, U.S. They come to us for training because philosophy is a human thing too. And they're going to take the tools we give them and they're going to use philosophy to help people in their milieu. And what unites us is the fact that we're human beings. The rest is just cosmetic differences. Unfortunately, I'm saying this unfortunately, money and power are not bad. They're necessary and moreover vital if they're used well. But if they're used badly, then they can divide people. We can make the differences between us the basis of conflict instead of the basis of mutual understanding and cooperation. And that's the big takeaway, I hope, from this show, aside from we're all as politically incorrect as the day is long. Some of you are worse than me. I'm so relieved to be hanging out with you.
We want to make you feel welcomed here by being our true, authentic selves. And sometimes that means we're going to cuss, talk shit, and have views that probably don't align with the current flow of the media right now. I don't know if being on the media side has ever helped anyone. I know Carol mentioned earlier, like, what are we being distracted from? Show of hands in this little chat here. Who remembers the O.J. Simpson trials in the 90s?
Oh my God.
We were watching it on TV, slow-mo, the slow-mo chase scene. Who could forget it?
Absolutely.
I was in Manhattan Beach
What
at
was
that
going
time.
on in Europe at the same time? What kind of war situation was going on? Kosovo.
Oh,
That's right.
That's
That
That
right.
was
Clinton-
almost not on TV in the
It's
slightest.
It was
Because
Trump.
OJ
Yeah.
was more interesting.
It was Clinton. And when I was in Serbia, I got to Belgrade. I have friends in Serbia too. And Croatia but when I got there, they still preserved some of the shell holes in the buildings in Belgrade, because Belgrade got shelled as well in that fiasco. So they remember. But the bad news sells. This is the mantra, and it's been true forever. There's a famous story about Hearst, the original Hearst. And he sent a sketch artist down to Cuba during just before the Spanish-American War down there. And he said, because they didn't have photographers back in the day, they had sketch artists. Sent a sketch artist down there and said, I want some sketches, so I can run them along with the war story. And the sketch artist sent back a telegram saying there is no war. And Hearst sent back a telegram to him saying, you furnish sketches, I will furnish war. William Randolph Hearst. You furnish sketches, I will furnish war. And they probably scuttled the Maine. We don't know really what the story is. You remember the USS Maine, and you being a Navy man, you know that story. You know the rhyme. Maine and Spain and all that. But here's the thing, that bad news sells, and there's something in the human psyche which where Freud took a run at it. No one's really, to my knowledge, explained it thoroughly, and maybe we're still waiting for some genius to come along. But everybody in journalism knows bad news sells. If you start telling good news to people, they'll tune you out. So they all got to outdo each other telling bad news, because that's what sells.
Yep. Sex, booze, all sins, right? Any sin sells.
Sin sells, and war sells, and conflict sells, and he said, she said sells. And anything that's actually good for you, you generally, it's not going to sell on primetime television, unfortunately, even the advertising. So what I wanted to say, may I just leave you with a thought? I mean, we're not having to wrap this up in this second, but all of what we've said points to something really important that maybe some of your viewers haven't thought about, and I think it's worth thinking about. So it's this, and it's very simple to say, that one of the reasons why people are able to gin up so much conflict based on race and based on gender, it's because we're depending on our sense of vision a lot. And evolutionarily, it became our most important sense. If you look at the older version of mammals, the social mammals, running around on all fours with their noses to the ground, actually had the sense of smell as predominant. So that's why canines are so good. Felines, rodents, bears, all these different four-legged mammals, which are pretty socially advanced, they're depending on their sense of smell, which is really acute. And it doesn't make as many mistakes. Okay? So they can smell a lot of things, whether this is a friend or a foe, or if it's a female, is she in heat? Is she sexually receptive or not? They don't rape each other because they rely on pheromones and they rely on a very acute sense of smell. When we got up on our hind legs, okay?
Oh, the worst.
Well, listen, I'm not saying it's better to be a bear, okay? I mean, they have their moments. But when we got up on our hind legs, this was like a major shift, and all kinds of things had to change for us to walk around upright. And so they did. But one of the things in a big way that changed was that the sense of vision took primacy, and the visual cortex is way bigger. Our sense of smell is not very much used unless you're in the kitchen a lot whipping up, dishes you need to. But basically it's a sense of vision. So that became very acute. And so people put a lot of weight evolutionarily. We're bred this way. We evolved this way to look around and see what's going on. Primarily hearing is second. Right? Smell is way, way down the list. So basically we look around, we look around at the world and we make snap judgments based on what we see. And that can be manipulated. That's the point. And when we look at somebody, the first thing we see is their pigmentation or their hairdo or their gender or their makeup or all the stuff, because that's what we're evolved to do, is to see. And that can work for us, but it can work big time against us if it's politicized. So what we don't see with our two eyes, but what we see with the mind when it's open, is the person's heart and the person's inner being. And that's the best self. Where the best of us resides is not on the surface. It's deeper. And we need, with our minds, to see deeper. And if we look at each other as human beings to begin with, then we see deeper and we don't have to have conflicts. That's what I wanted your viewers to think about.
I thought I was supposed to be scared of everything. Isn't that what you're taught, Carol? I'm going to be scared of everything?
No.
But isn't this scary?
No.
Nah, I'm not scared either. Despite their best efforts, I remain not scared. It is so great to have you on the show, Lou. I really love diving into the oppression of the white Jewish man getting run out of Canada, which is just absolutely mind-blowing here. But if you heard this thing today and you like what you listened to, please like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But more importantly, send us a message. Find us on social media. Contact Lou. We're going to have his contact info in the show notes. Contact myself or Carol. Ask us questions. Tell us what you love. Tell us what you hate. Tell me that you hate my beard and you want me to shave it up. Tell us something. Interact with us, because if this is just a one-directional thing, if this is just us, this is not just us preaching to you. We want your feedback. We want to know what kind of questions you have. What kind of topics do you want us to cover? How deep do you want us to go in some of these conversations? Do you like it? Did it make it uncomfortable? I hope it did. I had someone tell me one time, I kind of was worried. I was a little bit younger, like, oh, what will the neighbors think? And he said, hey, don't worry about that. They've never had a real thought in their entire life. Please take some time, turn off the noise in your world. Saying you're busy is not a compliment. Take some time for yourself. Have some real thought about some of these things. Question what it is that you're being told. Believe me, don't believe me, believe Lou, don't believe Lou, definitely believe Carol. Whatever we said, definitely believe Carol. But think of this stuff for yourself and determine for yourself if it's good. I remember seeing all these terrible racist stories on TV, and I look outside my neighborhood and I see kids, boys, girls, all different shapes, sizes, and colors, having a wonderful time together playing, because it wasn't until they were taught to not like and to distrust people that didn't look like them, until they were taught that, they just hung out because they were kids in the neighborhood and they wanted to hang out together.
Children are not born with any hatreds or any prejudices. It's all taught to them. It's all taught. Carol, could I ask you, have you heard this before? When it's about Taiwan, where you were born. So when I got to Taipei, and I had a very nice tour to Taipei. I met people, did events, but the 101 is so huge. It's the 101 that it is like the mother of all skyscrapers. Now it's been eclipsed by the one in Dubai, Khalifa. But basically the Burj Khalifa, yeah. And I've seen that one too. That's unbelievable. But in Taipei, the 101 is just, it towers over everything else, because there's nothing else in downtown Taipei that's even close. So this thing is even more gigantic, because so what it looked. And I said, you guys must be really proud of this. Like, it's the most amazing skyscraper in East Asia. And they said, oh no, we hate it, we can't stand it. This is Taiwanese. You were my Taiwanese hosts, and they said, no, it's very embarrassing. I said, what's the problem with it? It's incredible. They said, don't you see what it looks like? And I looked at it and said, no, I didn't see it. They said, it looks like a giant stack of Chinese takeaway food containers.
Oh, I didn't even see
that. It does. If you look.
Oh my God. I didn't even.
It does. If it's all, because it's designed, it's a bunch of stacked, it looks like Chinese food containers. And on the top, there's these two huge antennas that look like chopsticks sticking out of the top of it.
I never even thought of that. That is hysterical.
Yes. I thought I'd leave you with that, just for fun.
Well, all I can say is, after this conversation, it's kind of my mantra is do no harm. At the end of the day, just do no harm. Think about people, be considerate, compassionate, empathetic, kind, open-minded. It's what we're missing now.
Fully agree. Thank you so much, Lou, for being our guest today. Thank you, Carol, for being a fantastic co-host. And remember that no one can offend you against your will.
That's all for this episode of Titan Evolution Podcast. We hope this no-holds-barred conversation opened your eyes on what it takes to live a genuinely happy life according to your own terms. Now that you've treated yourself to such a refreshing discussion, you cannot listen to nonsense content anymore. Be sure not to miss an episode by subscribing to the show at TitanEvolutionPodcast.com. Don't forget to share the word so more people can be enlightened, informed, and entertained. Thank you for listening.